Art that we sent each other was in the basic format of combining text with images. So each of our correspondences had the general theme of putting together a puzzle, tying into the idea that this project was about piecing together the identity and the life of the person we were corresponding with. We also each had our own individual style, which generally stayed consistent throughout the correspondence.
So for my mail art theme, I basically chose to do puzzle layout. I didn't think of the idea before to print all of the same ones so it would be consistent. Just something I figured out around the third piece of mail that I sent. Each puzzle layout was colored, and then it had different quotes that were associated with putting a puzzle together. The actual conversation and questions that I was asking was through a green post-it note on the back of it in some form of abbreviation or pictogram. The quotes that I used ended up having relevance to creating a bigger picture when you align not only the conversation with the puzzle, and this was something that Christina actually did not realize until the very end.
So following my first correspondence, the first one that I did wasn't interpreted well, but I continued conversation with an emphasis on background image. Pictograms replaced the text of my answers to her questions on the post-it note, and I also used some abbreviations.
So one thing that we found really interesting was the fact that we had shared components through the mail art of decorating the outside of the envelope. Oftentimes we incorporated a picture or something in regards to our GMU number. In regards to our conversation through the mail art, we decided that it would be a better idea to make it not very complex or big with detailed questions. In the beginning of our project, actually, we ended up not having our conversations in sync. We kind of started off two different conversations, but eventually we ended up corresponding it into one conversation.
The first letter that I sent, trying to start a story, pictograms illustrating once upon a time. You can kind of see the 1 and the S and the clock. The rest of the images that I included into it was supposed to be context, so sort of expanding on setting or a choice of setting. Which, looking back, I feel like this was too complicated, which I didn't realize until a chance happening in the writing center.
I ended up having a really hard time trying to figure this one out on my own, so I ended up bringing it to some of my close friends here on campus to help me try to interpret the meaning. First off, we thought the once was actually an is, and we thought the 3 o'clock had significance. We also didn't really understand the idea of the chair, and we thought the forest meant something about like the idea of wood, so like maybe the start of a question. It was really hard to figure out what she was trying to say from her perspective and what I was getting from my friend's perspective as well as my own.
While she was consulting with one of her friends, they happened to be in the writing center at the same time I was giving a conference to someone. And the friend, Christian Chiffy, he deducted because his GMU number happened to be 208 and mine was 206, so he figured, oh, because they're close in the alphabet, I just have to go on Moodle and check the list of people's names in alphabetical order, and I can probably figure out who your partner is. During the conference, I just heard Christiana Carroll. And I was like, oh no. Because I saw my mail art across the room. I know I'm a terrible liar in person, so I was trying really hard to not spoil the project. I lied while giving some hints about it, but not completely revealing it. But it turned out near the end that I was indeed a terrible liar, and she did understand. This influenced how I continued with the rest of my letters. So I tried more detailed pictograms and some things that were not as obscure and tried to correlate with my partner's questions. The first thing that I received from Claire was snail mail art. Or at least the first thing I saw was snail with an envelope as its shell. I honestly thought this was super cute, and I definitely got the reference because I had been using mail for a long time. We're still part of the generation where mail was a thing. At first, I didn't see the post-it note, so I was a little confused as to what the quote was about, but then I found the post-it note, and it made sense. I thought this was a very interesting quote, and I liked how it related to the background image, and specifically the project itself. However, at this point, I wasn't sure if this layout was something she was going to continue with or not. When I read the post-it note, The image itself didn't really have to do with the question she was asking me. So I was wondering if her idea was to send art, but then include the actual text separate.
The intention behind the outside of the envelope by the snail mail of the You Got Mail actually came from hearing my dad's AOL account go off, because every time you get mail in it and you log into your AOL, it says, "You got mail." I really like the idea of putting some reference to puzzles along with the puzzle. I think the correspondence went really well, but I didn't know how to have a conversation exactly in a way that someone else would be able to pick up on. I didn't want to make it too complex because of that, so I ended up using pictograms along with words to help portray the actual conversation I wanted to start with my partner. So this is the second piece of mail art that I received from my partner. She did this in response to my question of what's up. To represent her answer was she drew the sky and then she put the "just kidding." You can see the conversation was able to be understood through both individuals, and we were able to respond to each other.
The main purpose when I sent this was originally I was trying to dissect the question that she sent me into two different images because I wanted to add a little bit of humor to the project. So being punny, what's up? The sky, obviously.
So confession time. We actually were crazy busy during this week that we were supposed to be sending the mail art, but we were still able to get the assignment done and still being able to communicate through our mail art, which was really impressive. The funny thing is Christina sent her second, third, and fourth mail art to me all on the same day, and her mail art actually had numbers written on the bottom so they would end up helping me keep in order, which is really appreciative because I am not organized.
I honestly had a similar problem with the mail art, at least going back through. I was very conscious of when I got them from the mailbox, making sure that they were all in the same order that they were put in. But it was at that point that I realized during reading all of these that the puzzle quotes were actually telling a story. They were going towards a specific end. Finally, with her last, it specifically says, "Be patient, just like a puzzle. It takes time for all the pieces of your life to come together." So I appreciated that moment of, haha, I know why she's doing this, which isn't something that you necessarily experience in a regular conversation.
A funny thing is I ended up sending my third, fourth, and fifth mail art to Christina all on the same day, and seeing how she ended up numbering hers in order, I kind of wish I did the same thing. But I'm glad she was still able to understand that there was a reason of why they were all being sent, and that there was a finishing to the story.
One of the biggest problems that we had with this project was taking into account how our was perceiving what we were sending. So, like we were talking about a little bit earlier with my original mail art that I sent, the pictograms were too obscure. I thought that I made them obvious enough, but my attempt to be creative and sort of elusive and open to interpretation, I lost my partner. She wasn't able to interpret it, and that definitely delayed the conversation and made it hard to keep communicating. So also the biggest thing that I've learned from this project, at least, is taking this into account and realizing that there are barriers depending on what pictograms or images you use and how they are interpreted.
We connected a lot of this to the relationship of text and images and memes. With memes, oftentimes we tend to see the same image being used over again if it's popular, and then we see different words or text being added to the image. The text is what helps support the understanding behind the image, along with the perspective of the author who added the words and how they ended up perceiving the image. One thing we realized with our first mail art was the fact that the text and image did not go along, where she was trying to start a story and I was guessing what the images meant in regards to the text.
So some limits and possibilities that go along with using image instead of text is that images will always be perceived differently. Like if you're at a museum and you're looking at a painting, no two people are going to look at a painting the same way, whereas they may have agreements on what it's saying. There will also be different things that they notice. So in that, there's also possibility though, because there isn't that limit of language. Somebody is always going to be able to look at an image and guess at least the context of what is being said. And it provides this universal language that surpasses what we traditionally use in terms of words, which vary across the world.
In regards to not only adding the visual sense of our mail art, we also added the sense of touch. We both ended up doing a puzzle and cutting it into pieces, so the other one had to put the pieces together in order to see the message. Along with that, you ended up having to use sight because you had to make sure the pieces were going in the correct spot so the message was going to be read correctly.